Hey everybody, good morning or good afternoon or good evening, depending on when it is that you are joining us here online. We want to say welcome and thanks for joining us, whether you're on Facebook or YouTube. We're glad that you're just taking a couple minutes to hang out with us, and we call this thing our online gathering, and we just want to welcome you to it. My name is Nick, and if this is your first time stumbling across the Pathways Church community, we just want to say hello and sort of introduce ourselves a little bit, I guess. You can find out more about us if you would like to by going to our website. You can go to findpathways.com and you can read up on us a little bit, stalk us, if you will, and find out a little bit more about who we are, some things that we aspire at least to believe, and even some of our core values maybe you'll resonate with. These are things that we've decided to, as we go on this journey together, we're sort of a group of people who some of us have been on this journey a little longer than others. Some of us are newer, some of us have been doing this for a while, but there's some things along the way that we've decided we want to place some value on as we go through this, and so you can read about those, and maybe they'll just give you a little opportunity to get to know us a little bit better. We're doing a series right now called The Death of Religion, because, it's like Halloween time, and so, creepy things or whatever are kind of fun, but we're talking about how Jesus did not come to make a religion better or to start a new religion, but actually to end religion, and that is extremely freeing, and that's what we're going to be diving into a little bit today. So maybe even that alone might pique your interest here with this group. I want to give you a couple housekeeping things here. First of all, it's just a really nice weekend in the Pacific Northwest. Somebody finally turned off the sprinklers that were hosing us down with water all week long, and it's just a beautiful sunny weekend. And so look, I hope that you get outside, get a chance to enjoy who God has made you to be, the surroundings that you're in, and hopefully connect with God. And if for some way in the middle of all that, you have a chance here to connect with us, that's great. What we're going to be doing today, of course, is we're going to be doing some singing here, which is coming up. And then at the end of our time today, we're going to do communion. And so I just like to prepare you for that, because at the end of our time, if you would like to participate in communion with us, you'll just need to get a couple things, right? Maybe you've got them already around the house. Just need maybe some crackers, a cracker, a piece of bread, and then some juice, some sort of cup. Like maybe it's some juice, maybe it's some leftover red wine, kind of whatever you have around the house. It's not really so important exactly what those symbols are, but we are given kind of an idea by Jesus himself of here's something to do to remember me, my death, burial, and resurrection, and the new life that we have in him. And that is the bread, which represents his body, and the juice, which represents his blood. And so we want to take those things today as a way to worship and to celebrate the new life that we have in Jesus. So if you've got some of those around and you want to gather something anywhere, here in the next few minutes, you're welcome to do that, and we'll carve out a time to take communion together at the end. What we're going to do now is our worship leader, Billy, is going to lead us in some singing, some songs. And if you're at home, you can stand up and sing if you want, or sit down and sing. And if you're home alone, no one's going to hear you, so you could sing out loud along with Billy. Or if you want to just quietly meditate and reflect, you can do that. In between the two songs Billy's going to lead us in, there's kind of a reflection prayer. And the whole idea for all this, we say it every week, is just to ease us into the awareness of God's presence here with us, okay? Because perhaps you need a little primer, a little warm-up to thinking about God, to being open to recognizing that he's here with us today, that he loves you, that he cares about you. And so this time of singing, it's a good time to express love for God, but in another way, it's really nice just to be reminded of how much God loves you. So hopefully both of those dynamics are happening today as we sing together. So Billy's going to lead us in that, and then when he's done, there's a little bumper video, and then we'll get into our series again as we're talking about the things in religion that Jesus hopes will just die. The death of religion. Okay, so Billy, why don't you take us away? Let's sing a couple songs, and then we'll come back and we'll get right to it. Let's do it.
Strength arises, we wait upon the Lord. Wait upon the Lord, we will wait upon the Lord. Strength arises, we wait upon the Lord. We will wait upon the Lord. We will wait us up on wings like eagles. Sing the rise as we wait upon the Lord. We will wait upon the Lord. We will wait upon the Lord. Sing the rise as we wait upon the Lord. We will wait upon the Lord. We will wait upon the Lord our God. You reign forever. Our hope God is able, He will never fail. He is Almighty God, greater than all we seek, greater than all we ask. He has done great things, lifted up, defeated the grave, raised to life. Our God is able, in His name we overcome. For the Lord our God is able. Oh, God is with us, God is on our side. He will make a way, far above all we know, far above all we hope. He has done great things, lifted up, He defeated the grave, raised to life. Our God is able, in His name we overcome. For the Lord our God is able. Yeah, yeah. Oh, He is able. Oh, He is able. God is with us. He will go before. He will never leave us. He will never leave us. God is for us. He has opened arms. He will never fail us. He will never fail us. Lifted up, He defeated the grave, raised to life. Our God is able, in His name we overcome. For the Lord our God is able, lifted up, He defeated the grave, raised to life. Our God is able, in His name we overcome. For the Lord our God is able. Oh, the Lord our God is able. For the Lord our God is able.
All right, that is great. Let's get started here. Love some of those quotes in that bumper there, and they're the same quotes that we had in the bumper last week, but there's some that are so good I thought we need to read those again and let them sink in a little bit. And we're going to be looking at a bunch of different quotes and changing the bumper up every week so that you get some new quotes to read through to kind of get us primed and ready to talk about what we want to talk about today. And we're super excited to do that here in our new series. But before we do that, I want to tell you about a new show that I'm watching. It's called The White Lotus. Has anybody seen this on HBO, The White Lotus? Tanya and I started watching it. And it's a fascinating look at very privileged people, and they don't really understand how privileged they are and the problems that they're wrestling with and sort of all of that. But what's interesting in the very first episode, in the pilot, right, is that someone you discover is dead, but you don't know who. You don't know who it is that has died. You don't know how they died. And so you go watching the whole first season wondering which one of these characters that I'm learning about is the one who dies and how are they going to die? Now, I love shows like that, right? Where it's sort of murder mysteries, you know, and you're trying to figure out how did this person die? You know, I love watching those TV shows and, you know, the cops are investigating and they're trying to figure out how did this person die? And they call in the medical examiner, right? And the medical examiner does an autopsy because they have to find out how did the victim die. And so the medical examiner, they find the cause of death, and it could be an accident, it could be natural causes, or it could be murder, right? It's just so fun. You got to figure out. I love those whodunits, you know, like kind of who is the killer and how did the person die, but somehow there's a person here that is dead. And that leads us here into our new series that we began last week called The Death of Religion. And we are looking at religion here, and we're noticing that there's some things about religion today that are starting to stink, as though there's parts of religion that have been dead for a while. And maybe it's a little bit like Weekend at Bernie's, right? Where somebody is sort of holding up this dead body of religion, parading it around like it's alive. But all of us are pretty sure that we have noticed that this religion is actually stinking and is probably dead. So we are starting this series here. Last week we began it and we're continuing today. We're looking actually in this series. Our text is Matthew 23, which is part of the last discourse of Jesus. It's also known, Matthew 23 is known as the 7 woes of Jesus. And a woe is not like a whoa horse, slow down. It's also not like a whoa, do you see that over there? It's actually a woe as in woe to you, which is a curse. And so what we find in Matthew 23 are the 7 curses of Jesus on religion, on the religion of his day. And we're applying it to the religion that is around us today. And so we look around here in Matthew 23 and we discover that Jesus makes a list of things that he says will absolutely kill religion. You kind of look around, you see religion is dead and rotting, and Jesus says, you know what? You could do an autopsy on this thing, and you will find these things as the cause of death. And so today, we get to do an autopsy. Aren't you excited? An autopsy right here online. We are going to do an autopsy, not of a dead body. We're going to do an autopsy of religion itself and talk about how do you kill a religion, okay? Just going to give you a step-by-step process on how you go about killing a religion. Now, as we talk today, I'd love for you to chime in, and you can do that here in the comments down below on Facebook or on YouTube as well. I know a lot of us are gathered on Facebook, and it's an easy way in Facebook in order to throw in comments and questions and all those type of things, and love for you to just dialogue there about that. But another great thing we could do is if you want to continue the conversation on Twitter or on Facebook, it'd be great if you want to use the hashtag death of religion. And it'd even be great if you want to post about this series. You can share it with your friends. I think this is a really good series for people who either really don't have anything to do with religion, don't have any background with religion, but have found themselves sort of wary about it. Or those of us even who have had a lot of background with religion, but have found ourselves oftentimes at odds with the way that religion has harmed or hurt people around us. And so maybe you just want to throw out the hashtag, death of religion, and make a post about this series, and that would be great, and it'd be a good way for us to continue the conversation together. Now, before we start reading the text of Matthew 23, I want to give you just kind of an overview here of what we call the last discourse. Now, the last discourse of Jesus, this kind of his last public speaking engagement here, his last public teaching, and it's found really in Matthew 23, 24, and 25. Now, Matthew 23 are really like the beginning of this whole thing, and they're the final words that Jesus has before heading to the cross. And what's interesting is you'd think that the last things that Jesus had to say before he left, you'd think that those last things would be stuff that people would want to study. You'd think that'd be really popular. You'd think that the last public teaching of Jesus would be something that people are pretty interested in. But Matthew 23 is one of those parts of the Gospels that I think is the most neglected. Really, people aren't doing a whole lot of sermon series on Matthew 23 and the 7 woes of Jesus. Probably because it makes us a little uncomfortable. And we're going to discover that today and as we go throughout the series. Because critiquing your own religion or having enough self-awareness to look at your system of belief, to look at your religion and notice where some things may have gotten off track, takes a lot of self-awareness, and it takes a lot of courage to critique some things that you have either thought or trusted in or relied on for a long time. And most preachers don't want to irritate you that way, and so they don't do sermon series on Matthew chapter 23. In fact, I had a long-time preacher tell me, you should not do a sermon series on Matthew chapter 23. And so, of course, what did that make me want to do? A sermon series on Matthew chapter 23, the 7 woes of Jesus, because that's just kind of who we are. Now, if you fast forward ahead, we're not going to read this part, but Matthew 24, chapter 24 is actually studied a lot. Matthew 23, not so much. Matthew 24 is poured over quite a bit more. Mostly, I think, because it's got a lot of apocalyptic feel to it. It's very end-timesy, right, type of stuff. Kind of like the book of Revelation. It has a little feel like that. Remember, we unpacked Revelation a year or so ago, and we discovered that people kind of like this sensationalized idea of the end of the world and God coming back and scrapping all of this and starting over, right? And Matthew 24 has a little bit of apocalyptic feel to it. It's easy for people to kind of make it into something very sensational, and so it's a lot more popular. The problem is it's very hard to understand. Matthew 24 is some of the hardest material to understand in all the Gospels because it's clearly intermingled, maybe some apocalyptic language is clearly intermingled with a prediction or warning about the fall of Jerusalem, not somewhere in the distant future, but actually in AD 70, near the time when Jesus is alive. In fact, a lot of people would say that it's actually all about the temple being destroyed in AD 70 and not at all about predicting some end-timesy part of the world. And there's a strong case to be made for that. Now, Matthew 25 is actually dealing with judgment. There's a parable of the 10 virgins, the parable of the talents, the parable of the sheep and the goats. And even if you don't understand chapter 24, you probably won't have any trouble understanding Matthew chapter 25. It's very clear. You might not like it. It's pretty indicting, particularly of religious people, but it is very clear. So, what I want you to see here, though, is that this Matthew 23 takes part in a larger context of this entire teaching of Jesus, the last public discourse of Jesus, from Matthew 23 all the way through Matthew 25. Now, Matthew 23 actually has 3 sections that I want you to see here. It has 3 parts. Verses 1 through 39, that's the length of Matthew 23. Verses 1 through 12 are really a statement on Jesus on what will kill a religion, right? It is the autopsy of religion. That's what we're going to look at today. The next section, verses 13 through 36, are the 7 woes or the 7 curses that Jesus pronounces on the religion of his day. And then the final couple verses is really a lament. It's Jesus' lament or a sad song that he sings over Jerusalem. It's sort of like a funeral dirge, a song that you would sing at a funeral. It's almost as though Jesus is looking over the dead body of religion and he's singing a funeral dirge over it. All right, so those are the 3 sections that we're going to look at, but today we really want to focus on verses 1 through 12, rather, which is Jesus' autopsy and discovering what has killed the religion of his day. So let's just read this whole section first, and then we'll break it down a little bit, because sometimes I think reading something kind of in a block together helps us understand sort of the thrust or the feel of it better when we read it in a bigger section. So rather than just taking it verse by verse, let's read it all together here, and then we'll do the dissection. We'll get this religion up on the table and find out, how did it die? All right, let's read it here. Matthew 23, starting with verse 1. Then Jesus said to the crowds and to his disciples, "The teachers of the law and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. So you must be careful to do everything they tell you, but do not do what they do, for they do not practice what they preach. They tie up heavy, cumbersome loads and put them on other people's shoulders, but they themselves are not willing to lift a finger to move them. Everything they do is done for people to see. They make their phylacteries wide and the tassels on their garments long. They love the place of honor at banquets and the most important seats in the synagogues. They love to be greeted with respect in the marketplaces and to be called rabbi by others. But you are not to be called rabbi, for you have one teacher, and you are all brothers. And do not call anyone on earth father, for you have one Father, and he is in heaven. Nor are you to be called instructors, for you have one instructor, the Messiah. The greatest among you will be your servant, for those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted." Wow. Okay, those are the words of Jesus here, and we're going to use those here to get a little glimpse into what Jesus thinks will kill religion. So we want to take religion, right, and we're going to put it up on the table today, and we are going to do an autopsy and find out what killed this thing. What will kill religion, right? And there's three big things that Jesus mentions here that will absolutely kill religion. And the first one is this: a lack of sincerity. When we are not sincere about what we say and what we believe, when we aren't sincere about those things, we will preach, but we will not practice what we preach. And there's lots of insincere religion. But what's tragic here is that these people have an insincere religion, but they even have the right God. You could have the right God and still be insincere. Let's remind ourselves of these words here, Matthew 23, 1-3. Then Jesus said to the crowds and to his disciples, "The teachers of the law and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. So you must be careful to do everything they tell you, but do not do what they do, for they do not practice what they preach." You see, that's what Jesus is saying here. How do you kill a religion? Here's what you do. You just don't practice what you preach. And that will absolutely kill a religion. You see, we could come together here, online, or in person, and we could teach all the right things. We could believe all the right things. We could say all the right things. We could sing the right songs. We could have all our doctrines correct, but still not practice what we preach. We could do all those right things, but not actually live like Jesus or put into practice what he values. And if we fail to practice what we preach, Jesus says that will absolutely kill your religion. Now, that's pretty familiar, isn't it? Because I would say that this is the most common critique of Christianity today. That it is just not sincere. Or another way of saying this would be that they're just a bunch of hypocrites. They talk a good game, but the way that they actually live, the way that they treat people, the things that they actually value in the life, the way that they spend their time and how they interact with people doesn't look at all like Jesus. And that sinks in, doesn't it? You see, because we could come together as a church, as a group of people, and talk about loving our neighbor and have sermons on what it means to love our neighbor, but still walk away and attack those who disagree with us on Facebook or on school boards or at Capitol buildings or just wherever it is that you go in life. I mean, I have noticed sometimes that some of the people who are most religious, even with the right God, are some of the meanest people that I know. And you think those two things should not go together, but it does appear to happen that maybe even in your life, you've known some of the meanest people you know are actually some of the most religious. And that's a problem. You see, we could come together and we could take communion, right? We're going to do that at the end today. It's actually a religious-y thing that we're going to do. And we could come together, take communion. We could thank God for his willingness to lay down his own rights, right? To step out of heaven, to lay down his own rights, sacrifice his life on the cross for the benefit of others. And we could celebrate that, sing about it, take communion to remember it, and then walk away and not be willing to do the most simple things to help others around us. I mean, we could walk away from the table, from communion, where God lays down his rights, and walk out of that space immediately offended if our own rights have been impeded in any way. You see the disconnect? You see, we could hear sermons on helping the poor, and we could learn out of the Old Testament scriptures about the safety net programs that the Israelites were actually commanded by God to put into place to take care of those on the margins in their society. But walk away from that and refuse to care about the systemic injustice and poverty in our own society. You see, we could argue and fight and get so politically active for prayers in school, but not have any prayer in our home. We could crusade against abortion and picket outside of clinics and say, I'm pro-life, and yet never adopt a baby or invite a pregnant teenager into our home. I mean, I could go on and give so many examples here, but you get the point, right? And what's worse is you can always open your Bible and find a verse, pulled out of context, of course, to justify your anti-Jesus attitude and behavior. I mean, you can sit in Moses' seat and find a verse to justify anything you do. And in fact, that's what Jesus is saying that the religious leaders are doing. They're even using the Bible in insincere ways. And if you do that, sooner or later, your religion will be on life support. And you look around today, and Christianity in America appears to be shrinking or in decline, right? All the metrics say that church attendance is going down across the United States. And you could blame it on the godless, heathen, atheist, secular progressives taking over society. But I wonder if Jesus might not find another cause of death. And that is a lack of sincerity. Hypocrisy. You see, because people today don't seem to hate Jesus. Jesus has never been more popular. But people are done with religion that has Jesus' name on it. People today aren't really asking, do I believe what you believe? What they're really asking is, do I want to be like you? And when they look at us and they see people who are unpleasant to be around, who are mean, when they look at us and they see that we don't practice what we preach, the answer appears to be no thanks. What good is religion even if you believe the right things, if I end up like you? Wow. You see, religion that is insincere seems good only for those who are inside of it playing it like a game. Because religion, as a game, can be weaponized and subverted so that it does not help people connect to God, but really at that point only exists to help those who are inside the club already to feel good about themselves, usually at the expense of others. It isn't about God anymore at that point, but about playing some game. And when religion just becomes a game, it becomes small and it loses any value to the culture, to the world. As Jesus says, it would lose its saltiness or its light. And a lot of religion today seems to just be a game. And people play the game, but they just don't seem to be very sincere about Jesus, right? And you know, there's some of you watching, you're saying, yeah, I recognize that all the time, right? I just want to go ahead and affirm that you're right. There's a lot of religion out there that's being propped up and saying, look how vibrant this is, look how good it is, but it stinks, right? I mean, we see preachers and churches and organizations that just want book deals and bigger budgets and political influence. And we find them very outspoken on issues commanding obedience to strict sexual ethics. But then over time, we discover that many of them themselves were actually fooling around, or perhaps were skimming money, or any number of other bad things. And who can blame people then for thinking that this religion is dead and starting to stink? Because religion falls apart when you start holding people to a bunch of rules, but you don't hold yourself to them. And see, if you miss sincerity in religion, no matter where you stand on anything, you are wrong. You can be right about a lot of things, you can have a lot of things down pat, but if you are insincere, you're wrong. And Jesus is saying that religion full of insincerity is wrong, and it ought to die. All right, so a lack of insincerity, that'll kill our patient, religion. But what else has killed this victim? Well, the second thing Jesus mentions is a lack of sympathy. And this means when you care more about rules than you do about people themselves. And so Jesus mentions this in Matthew 23, verse 4, which we've already read. They, the religious leaders, the Pharisees, tie up heavy, cumbersome loads and put them on other people's shoulders. But they themselves are not willing to lift a finger to move them. Jesus is saying here, these religious leaders, they talk a good game, but they do not care about the people that they're supposed to be guiding. Jesus is diagnosing a problem here. Religion that has gone out of its way to make rules that don't liberate people, but simply just pile on a heavy weight. And if you have been around religion for any period of time, you know that it can be very heavy indeed. Religion has a way of adding more and more rules to the point it becomes a burden that no one can bear. And many of us have become exhausted just trying to perform, to keep all the rules, to do everything we're supposed to do. And it seems like there's always one more rule to do. And we do it at a certain point, not because we want to, but because we sort of have to. And at that point, religion becomes a weight around our neck. Now, we finished our last series. I remember we did the book of Exodus. And you say, wait a minute, we're done with Exodus? How dare you bring this up, right? You promised you would never mention Exodus again. And, you know, the amount of time that we spent in Exodus, I suppose that would be fair. But I just want to remind you that we read the rules that were given to the people. Remember the 10 Commandments, the Decalogue, as we called them, right? There were 10 commandments there. Only 10. Seems pretty easy. We just got 10 to keep in mind here. But you remember one of them was to honor the Sabbath day and keep it holy. And the way to honor it was not to work. You remember that? Don't work on the Sabbath. You think, okay, fine. I'll take the day off. I'd like to have a day off anyway. But that sounds easy and simple and maybe even good. But the religious tradition and the Pharisees had come to a point where they decided we need to define what is work. And so they added almost an additional 600 rules defining what it meant to work. And so all of these rules, I mean, think about that, 600 rules about what it means to work. And so all these rules, they worked out great for the professionals of religion, right? Those who were professionals at religion, who they spent all their time just keeping the rules. In fact, they actually turned out really good for them because they were an excellent metric or a way for them to demonstrate how pious they really were. But the problem was for the non-professionals, the non-professional religious people, just your everyday ordinary person, it made life sort of hard, especially for the poor, the sick, and the marginalized, because they didn't have time to just try to perform and play some sort of game of rules. They didn't have time to play this game. They were just trying to survive. And that's why Jesus keeps healing people on the Sabbath day, right? I mean, Jesus runs into these people. We looked at the story even a little bit last week. We'll look at it again later. Jesus meets somebody on the Sabbath day and he heals them, and he gets in trouble every time. You think, why does Jesus keep doing this? You know you're not supposed to be doing this on the Sabbath. You're just going to irritate these people. And you wonder, well, why is it such a big deal that he heals someone on the Sabbath? Well, he was breaking the rule, don't work on the Sabbath. And the Pharisees had listed out all these rules of what it meant to work. And guess what made the list? Healing. Healing is work, so the rule assumes. And so you're not supposed to heal somebody on the Sabbath. And this is all fine and good for the religious leaders because, of course, they're not healing anybody anyway, so there's just one that I got done. Check it off, right? But, of course, who gets hurt by this? The sick, the injured. And so this rule here, sometimes rules, especially even religious rules, become actually a great way of avoiding doing what is right. Oh, I'd love to help. I mean, maybe you're not even able to heal people like Jesus, but you could certainly bandage them, take them to a doctor, feed them, clothe them, whatever else, right? But you could walk on by on the Sabbath day and say, oh, man, love to help, but, God doesn't want us doing that type of thing on the Sabbath. And so all you're doing with your religious rules is you're hiding behind them. And see, a religion that has no sympathy for people and only a bunch of rules is just dead. You might as well bury that sucker. Now, here's the third thing that Jesus mentions will kill a religion, and that is a lack of humility. And I don't know if you noticed this, but religion often lacks humility. That's not just the Christian religion. I think all religion in general often lacks humility. And there's two types of pride that we see in religion most. The first one is this, just simply show-offs. People who want to be noticed and they want to be recognized. And there's a lot of people who use religion as a vehicle to be seen and to be noticed, right? There's a lot of people who think, hey, I think I could leverage this whole religion thing to get a good book deal. Or, maybe I'm going to start a podcast or start a YouTube channel or maybe, start a music career. I'll become a worship leader and I'll release an album and that'll get me into this whole music career. And religion is one of the primary vehicles that people use to get notoriety. There are lots of insecure people who enter church work with good motives, I hope, to begin with, but end up using the church as a corporate ladder or some sort of promotional platform, not really for God, but for themselves. And so people leverage religion for fame and, to be honest, sometimes fortune, or to promote their career. In fact, a while back, I stopped going to a lot of local churches' pastors' luncheons, right? In our area, we have pastors that come together for luncheons, talk about church stuff and pray for one another. But I would go to those things and quickly discovered that it felt a lot more like corporate ladder networking rather than us kind of sharing things together and like helping one another out. It really felt like people showing off and felt gross and thought, I don't want to go to this anymore. And this isn't really new for religion. This isn't a new occurrence, right? Jesus saw it. In verse 2, you saw that he said the Pharisees, they like to sit in Moses' seat. And you think, what is that? Well, partly it's figurative, right? The people, the Pharisees, the religious leaders, they see themselves as sort of the leadership descendants of Moses himself. So in a figurative sense, they are sitting in Moses' seat, his seat of authority. That's what it's all about. But there's also a literal sense, because Moses' chair was actually a big stone chair at the front of a synagogue. And it was elevated, it was the biggest chair, and everyone knew that you were special if you sat in the elevated big stone Moses seat. You sit in that chair and you are in charge. And so why would the Pharisees want to sit in Moses' chair? Well, to be seen. That's why the Pharisees did it. They wanted people to notice them. They wanted to be seen. That's why they did everything. Jesus says it here in Matthew 23, verse 5. Everything they do is done for people to see. They make their phylacteries wide and their tassels on their garments long. They love the places of honor at banquets and the most important seats in the synagogues. They love to be greeted with respect in the marketplaces and to be called rabbi by others. He's saying they just want to show off, right? They're just doing these things in order to be noticed. Now, I love that Jesus uses the word phylacteries here, okay? Phylacteries. Say it with me. Phylacteries. Great word, right? It's not prophylactics. That's a totally other thing. It is phylacteries, right? And it's kind of a weird word, but what it is a small leather sort of parchment box with scriptures inside that the Hebrew people would put on their head. And it would contain several scriptures. It would contain Exodus 15, 2 through 10. Often it would contain Exodus 15, 11 through 16. It would also contain Deuteronomy 6, 4 to 9, which is where it comes from, and Deuteronomy 11, 13 through 21. And you think, why are these people putting boxes of scripture writings inside? Why are they putting those on their head? Well, it comes from Deuteronomy 6, 4 through 9, some commandments to Israel later on in the Pentateuch, right? And we see here, it says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength," right? "These commandments I give you today are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. And tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads," right? That is what Deuteronomy 6 says, is you better tie these things as symbols on your hands and on your foreheads. And people took this literally. And so they took these verses, these commandments, put them in a box, tied them to their head, and you'll see also wrapped around their arms to their hand. And so they had these things tied to them, and it was to remind them, of God's commands. But then, to someone, it seemed, if I make this box a little bigger, it's more noticeable. And the more noticeable it is, the more religious, more spiritual I look. And so they tried to make this box on their head as big as they possibly could to have it on their head. And now, of course, they've missed the point, which was simply, I want you to talk about these commands, remember them, repeat them, put them on your heart, right? Now they've missed the point, but they look ridiculous as well. He also mentions tassels, and that comes from another verse, leaving the hems of your garment like tassels. And so people notice, wow, people can see this, and so they made them longer, and the longer they were, the more religious they looked. And you say, well, that's ridiculous. Okay, but we do the same thing. Often, we try to figure out what's the biggest thing I can do so that people will see me. And there's a good lesson in there. If you're concerned about whether people notice you and what they think, you're probably missing the point. And Jesus would say, if that kind of thinking comes into your religion, it's as good as dead. But it isn't just a lack of humility in showing off. It's also in sort of being the ultimate authority. In other words, that you are the know-it-all. And that is probably a way that religion is also noticed to have a lack of humility, is that religion and religious leaders and systems often come off and want you to believe that they know it all. They have all the answers. And Jesus mentions this here in Matthew 23, 8 to 10. But you are not to be called rabbi, for you have one teacher, and you are all brothers. And do not call anyone on earth father, for you have one Father, and he is in heaven. Nor are you to be called instructors, for you have one instructor, the Messiah. Now, Jesus here is going to be addressing some titles that the religious people use: rabbi, father, teacher. And there's nothing inherently wrong with these titles, right? They're just titles, like job titles. But religion is using these titles to elevate people's status as authorities who know it all. It is sort of a power play. Rabbi, it just means my master or my teacher. And in Talmudic times, a rabbi's status was huge. It was immense. Disciples had to obey their rabbi without question. Whatever the rabbi said, I mean, it was from God's, mouth directly to them. And they were never even, in fact, to walk beside or in front of their rabbi. They had to always walk behind him. In fact, they weren't even supposed to greet their rabbi until the rabbi had greeted them first. Why? Because this was more than respect. These rabbis were people who knew everything. And I don't think Jesus is saying that the words, that the titles themselves, rabbi, father, teacher, whatever, are bad. He's critiquing how they're using them to elevate themselves. It's kind of like, it's the reason why I don't like the title pastor. Somebody comes up to me and say, hey, Pastor Nick, I just cringe and die a little inside. So if you come up and call me that, I will cringe and die a little bit inside, because I don't really like being addressed that way. I mean, I get pastor is a job description. I just don't like it as a first name, right? I understand it's a title, but I have a first name. It's Nick. And it feels to me like even this word pastor today has become sort of like these words that Jesus is saying. Not that the word is bad, but the way that it's used now has become sort of pretentious, right? The word has come to mean someone who is a know-it-all, an authority. And see, religion often puffs itself up as having all the answers. And when it comes across that way, it's prideful. You see, instead of asking questions in religion, we're often more likely to make declarations, right? Instead of encouraging people to ask questions, to think, ourselves to ask questions and think, we're much more likely to just say what I believe, declare it. Instead of helping people learn to think, we often tell them what to think. Instead of listening to other people's experiences and allowing the Spirit of Jesus to help us discern what faith might look like in their particular shoes, we quickly speak out of only our own perspective without fully considering theirs. Instead of holding our convictions lightly, these things that we think we believe, instead of holding these convictions lightly, especially the ones that the Bible doesn't seem to even address very clearly, we just assume that whatever stance we have is final and correct, and that other people must be wrong if they see it differently. And so we make people even sign statements of faith in order to belong to the group that we are in. Instead of assuming that we probably don't have everything right and continue to get new information, to learn, to grow, and to then, because of that new information, sometimes change our minds. Instead, in religion, what happens is we often view any change in our understanding of God or the Bible as some sort of dangerous, slippery slope to heresy, as something that's very bad, as though learning and growing and changing is something that is wrong. And I would say that all of that stems from a unhealthy dose of pride. You see, religion has historically made very little room for humility. It's been an exercise in power over, right? Power over people, where we use coercion and guilt and fear and commands and threats and politics even sometimes, to kind of force people to do something, to believe a certain way, to have a behavior modification of some kind. Religion has been an exercise in power over rather than power under, where we come under people, serve them, love them, sacrifice for them, support them, in order that they would want to make changes in their life. And see, when we approach religion as a power over structure, this power over type of religion that has all the answers and never needs to ask questions or rethink things, that type of religion always ends as a zombie. It pretends to be alive, but we all know it's dead inside. It's eating up people's brains around them, right? I mean, it really is Weekend at Bernie's. It might be upright, but it's sort of starting to stink around here. And what has killed this religion? Well, it's usually pride. Religious pride is a poison. And you drink enough of that prideful stuff, and I'll tell you what, your religion will die. And what's more, Jesus will want your religion to die. Now, some of you, I know religion has messed up your life more than anything else. Some of you have been deeply hurt by religion and religious people. I mean, I meet many people all the time who actually have sort of a form, it feels like, of PTSD from religious stuff that has happened in the past. And some of us have seen the problems here that Jesus has mentioned and say, yep, I knew it. I knew I saw all that stuff there, and I don't want anything to do with that stuff. And I get it, but I just want to remind you that there's a big difference between Jesus himself and that kind of religion. And we can throw away all of that stuff and still look to Jesus, because he hates it too. And he tells us that there is another way. And that's why this section ends. Verse 11 says, "The greatest among you will be your servant. For those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted." What is the option here? The option is to let all of that prideful religion die. To take the power over religion of a model of the power over model of religion off of life support. Just let all this religious stuff, let it die. Don't try to perform CPR. Don't try to stand it up like Bernie and pretend that everything's okay. No, Jesus saying, just let it all die. Stop doing these things because you have to, or you want people to see you do it, or you hope that it earns you something with God. Just rest. Let all that stuff die. And embrace instead the power under love of God. Become a servant. Don't worry about being a religious leader. Just become a servant. Love others. Sacrifice for people. Give up your own rights, things that matter to you, if it'll help someone else. Humble yourself. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. And if we could do that, we might just find something beautiful rising out of the ashes of that old dead religion. I want to leave you with Jesus' words here in Matthew 11, a part that really plays into Matthew 23. It's almost like you don't understand Matthew 23 if you don't know Matthew 11, because the only reason we have Matthew chapter 23 is because people didn't understand Matthew chapter 11. And I love the way that Eugene Peterson puts Jesus' words here in Matthew 11 verses 28 through 30 in his translation, The Message. He says, "Are you tired, worn out, burned out on religion? Then come to me. Get away with me, and you'll recover your life. I'll show you how to take a real rest. Walk with me and work with me. Watch how I do it. Learn the unforced rhythms of grace. I won't lay anything heavy or ill-fitting on you. Keep company with me, and you'll learn to live freely." and lightly. Wow. Love that. Jesus is not coming to start a new religion or to fix what was broken in the old one. He's inviting you to walk away from all of that, to let it die and simply go with him. That his grace is enough. And that is really what we celebrate at communion. It's not a visual. Communion isn't a visual of something broken being fixed and making it better. It's not putting lipstick on a pig, right? I mean, it's finding resurrection after death. I mean, that's what the cross is. Jesus allowing himself to die so that something better can live. And that's what we want to discover in the sacrifice of Jesus, that Jesus is inviting us to that too. Is he inviting us to new life? Absolutely. It's not just a life when you die that you float up to heaven. He's inviting you to a new way of living life now that he promises is so much more fulfilling. But it's also an invitation to let some things die. Because you will not find this freeing life unless you let the things die that have been holding you back. And for a lot of us, that's been a religion that's gone bad. Over the next few weeks, we're going to talk about the critiques of Jesus on religion. But we're also in the midst of it going to find a way to new life. So hang in there, because I promise you, there is a beauty and a simplicity to following Jesus. And you can leave all the rest of that mess behind. Jesus, we thank you so much that you have come to offer us a new way. Not a religion 2.0 or fixing something that was broken there, but walking away from it all together, ending religion, becoming the sacrifice once for all, that no more is needed. Help us to have the courage to lay aside these things that we have used as a crutch, but that have often harmed us and people around us because we've relied on it in place of you. Help us to lay all that aside and find connection with you alone. Thank you that you desire to connect with us individually, not through some sort of intermediary, that you have come to live within us. And may that be freeing and liberating, that we no longer do things because we have to or feel like we should, but simply because you're so good. There's just some things we want to do. We love you, Jesus. It's in your name we pray. Amen. We're going to go to communion. I'm going to sing a song, Your Grace is Enough. And as we do that, and as we sing, maybe it's a good time to celebrate. Maybe you want to take communion with us. You can do that if you like. And then after that's over, we'll come back for some announcements together. Let's go to communion.
Your faithfulness, oh God. You wrestle with the sinner's heart. You lead us by still waters into mercy, and nothing can keep us apart. So remember your people, remember your children, remember your promise, oh God. Your grace is enough, your grace is enough, your grace is enough. enough for me. Great is your love and justice, God. You use the weak to lead the strong. You lead us in the song of your salvation, and all your people sing along. So remember your people, remember your children, remember your promise, oh God. Your grace is enough. Your grace is enough. Your grace is enough for me. Hey, your grace is enough. Your grace is enough. Your grace is enough for me. So remember your people, remember your children, remember your promise, oh God. Your grace is enough. Your grace is enough. Your grace is enough for me. Yeah, your grace is enough. Heaven reaching down to us. Your grace is enough for me. Hey, your grace is enough, and I'm covered in your love. Your grace is enough for me, for me. For me, yeah.
Oh, that's great. Thanks, Billy. Appreciate that. Just a couple announcements here as we wrap up today. First of all, if you'd like to give, you can do that. And first of all, I just want to thank you. So many of you have been giving sacrificially to the Pathways Church community. And really just appreciate that. We've been able to do a lot of benevolence for people to help people out. That's been really fun to do, and also just to continue the ministries that we are doing, because so many of you, even though a lot of you are online, are continuing to support the Pathways Church community. And I want to say thank you for that. And if you would like to put some skin in the game, get more involved in this group, you can do that. A way to give is you can go to our website at findpathways.com/donate, and you can set up a gift there. You can do a one-time gift, or you can set up a recurring gift. You can also text in a gift amount to the number 84321. Especially if you're local, it's really easy to text in a gift amount that way. If you'd like to do that, that would obviously be great as well. We have an email newsletter that we send out just to kind of give some announcements of things that are going on. If you're not on that already and don't receive that, you can message us on Facebook and leave your name and your email address, and we'd be happy to send out some information, get you on the list that way. Or you can email me. My email's on the screen here, and just drop me a note and say, hey, I want to be on the email list so that I know what's going on. I know we haven't had as many announcements lately because there's just not as many things that we're doing, just big events, because we feel a little weird about it because COVID cases are so high. A lot of us are meeting in person, some of us are, and most of us are vaccinated and all that, but it still feels weird to be doing a bunch of events. We've kind of intentionally not been planning things in person so much, just to make sure we wait till some of the cases come down again to do that. So what we will do this week, though, is our virtual happy hour on Wednesday. If you'd like to be a part of that, we'll post all the information, the Zoom chat number. You can log in at 6:30 p.m. and we're just going to say hi to each other. And we'll have it open for a half hour, but which I guess it should be called happy half hour instead of happy hour. But anyway, we'll have it open for 30 minutes. And if you want to pop in even for 5 minutes and just say, hey, that would be great. We would love to see you then. Halloween is a Sunday this year, which is pretty cool. So we are going to have a Halloween party on Halloween. And in person, we're going to come in costumes. I'd suggest you choose a costume that has a mask because you have to wear one anyway. So just choose a costume that has a mask. But if you're online, we want to see pictures of your costumes, all right? So what we want to do is, the day before that Sunday, take a picture of you in your costume and then send it in. You can you can take the picture and post it to our page, our Facebook page, but next week we'll have another place that you can send it as well. And we'd just love to see all the costumes that people have around, and we're looking for kind of a fun party idea that we're going to be doing in person that day too. So I look forward to that as well. All right, that's it for this week. Hope you have a really good week. I pray that as you go out this week, out of this place, wherever you are right now, that you would feel the love of God around you wherever you go. So we'll see you next time. Bye.